charged with making a decision, and we have to look at the data and the science because it impacts, somebody said that this is community choice. That's what synthetic turf is all about. No, it's not. In the coastal zone, it's more than that. We have to evaluate it. So that's where I am. I just wanted to be
That
direct.
the PFAs are only one potential chemical related to plastic usage that is our concern. The greater concern that we have is simply the transport of microplastics into the greater environment. And we heard from the university and their consultants that they are willing to work with us on drainage solutions to capture stormwater. We don't have those plans, but I do believe that there are feasible solutions to reduce the transport of contaminants off-site. But our staff would note that filtering microplastics is historically very tricky, and we may be talking more about a scale of how you could reduce, not necessarily eliminate microplastics from that sort of stormwater. And frankly, our concern is that there are other methods of transport that haven't been addressed by the university either this week or in our previous questions. And that is tracking of the material off the field. Typically, as the grass breaks down, it sticks to players and is tracked off the field. But particularly in the Santa Barbara area where we have heavy winds due to our frequency of Santa Ana wind events, we haven't seen a potential solution for simply windborne transport of microplastics into the surrounding environment. And thus, we do believe that it's still possible and likely that these sorts of microplastics will make their way into the surrounding water bodies, the wetlands, et cetera. So with that, I'm going to close our staff comment. In regard to recycling, we didn't receive any information on recycling as part of this package. And of course, that was one of our main questions to the university is what happens at the expected end of life? Because the expected life for the turf is only about 10 years. So over a 50-year period, this sod would need to be replaced about 5 times, and longer if, of course, if this field continues after 50 years, it'll be continuously replaced. Now, we do have concerns that we don't have evidence that's recyclable, can be recycled, but the university this week did provide some additional information that they believe there's a facility about 100 miles from the campus that may be able to accept this material. And we heard Ms. Barsky note that she's willing to accept a condition that the material be recycled and that they would document that. But I would just note that would lead to potential compliance problems that would happen later down the line. Would happen at the end of the 10 years. And frankly, as this occurs over many decades, it leads to compliance issues, difficult for our staff to ensure compliance, and by future university staff as well to ensure that this sort of recycling will continue to happen in the future.
To be honest, I've been sort of sitting here a little dumbstruck that, a public university that calls themselves a leader in sustainability, and which I was under that impression, that, they come forward with a project like this. This is plastics, just coming off a COP, conversation now, we're stuck on all these false solutions that are being pushed really, really hard by industry. But it's really, business as usual because we're using the same petrochemicals and the same processes. In this case, we don't know what that recycling is going to be for that kind of rubber. I'm pretty sure it's going to be chemical recycling, which the entire plastic industry has an enormous environmental justice impact from the very beginning, from inception to the very, actually it never ends because plastic does not degrade. It just breaks into smaller and smaller pieces. So I'm very disappointed UCSB brought this forward. I would not, I don't think in any case I would support a gigantic turf like that, artificial turf in the coastal zone. But I do appreciate staff sort of trying to dig in as much as possible to, find the data, which obviously was kept from us, so that we today would get all this greenwashing. So I will definitely support staff's recommendation on this.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to thank everybody for their input and for being here today and for the application that has come forward. And I will say, for those who don't know, I am a biologist. I have a PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology from UCSB. So I'm going to come at this from a little bit of a different perspective. And I actually hope that some of the industry folks are still online listening to our comments right now. So I just want to make a few points. One, I had some concern, and I should also say, as a former banana slug and as a former UCSC employee, I've been within the UC system. I was within the UC system for around 11 years. And one thing that came up for me was just the UCSC, that the UC has a sustainability policy. And I see on some levels that this fits within that under the water consumption, but then I see it not fitting around the issue around waste, because one of the goals in the area of the sustainability policy is zero waste. And I'll also say for the public, I sit on the Santa Cruz County Integrated Waste Management Task Force. And one of the things we look at is end of life for all the different things that we're throwing away. And so, for example, when we talk about things that are compostable and we move policies forward saying we're going to, move forward with composting materials, the question is, do you have a site that can actually compost those materials? And if you don't have a waste site near you that can compost those materials, it goes straight into the landfill. And so for me, one of the big issues that came up is the fact that there may be a site close by that could recycle. That's not good enough, because there's a good chance they can't recycle. And then all this goes in the landfill every 10 years. And so that's a big issue for me around the piece around plastics and what we're trying to do with plastics. And I'll just say, just for folks' information, here in Monterey Bay, they find microplastics at every single depth within the Monterey Bay. And that's why it's so important that we are trying to do everything we can to reduce microplastics going in our environment. Secondary treated water is great for watering. And, if that's something that we can continue to do and refine on these types of fields, I think it's much more sustainable than moving towards something that's plastic. I did also want to comment on some of the statements that were made. One was around the use of pesticides. And so the nice thing about having computers that we can kind of Google and fact check. UCSB sustainability plan in 2020, they converted all of their grounds equipment to zero emission. So this notion that they're going to have to maintain these fields with, lawnmowers that are going to be giving off gas emissions, I find that to be, well, just based on what I read on UCSB's website, that was not true, and the statements that were made were misleading. Also, the integrated pest management plan states that UCSB uses the least toxic chemical pesticide possible, and the use of chemicals and pesticides are only in targeted locations for targeted species, and that chemical pesticides are considered a last resort under the tenets of the integrated pest management plan. So again, I felt that statement around pesticides, leaching, and all these concerns around that very misleading to the board. And again, really pointing to the issues around the carbon footprint. We don't know how long it takes for these things to break down. We don't know what they can be recycled into, and we don't know when end of life is for this type of material. But it's not something that's going to biodegrade within probably our lifetime. Whereas we know that the grass fields are able to capture carbon. It sounds like we're able to use secondary water, and we're not, and the carbon footprint's much lower. So I'm fully supportive of the staff recommendation on this one. If you all want to work with them, and if the industry can come up with something that's more biodegradable and more environmentally friendly, that'd be great. But I just didn't hear enough here today to understand how this would be a sustainable and viable option, given all the issues that we're facing with trying to keep plastics out of our environment.
Commissioner Eckerly?
Thank you so much. I will keep this very brief. I just wanted to provide some statewide context and reiterate some of the input from my fellow commissioners. We all know microplastics are pervasive in our environment. They pose ecological and human health risks. They're found in human tissues, in fish. They accumulate in the food webs. It is a huge problem, and there's a lot of uncertainty about the sources, the efficacy of treatment, the impacts, and the state is responding to the rising concerns about the potential impacts of microplastics, both on the ocean and on human health. We've prioritized actions to address this issue, both in drinking water and in the coastal and marine environment. Last year, the Ocean Protection Council adopted the nation's first statewide microplastic strategy. It outlines key research priorities to get at some of the questions that we need answered right away, as well as early actions to reduce microplastic pollution in coastal and ocean waters. So we know that artificial turf does pose microplastic pollution concerns and leaching of chemical additives. The Department of Toxic Substances Control, given these ongoing concerns, has committed to evaluating the environmental risk of artificial turf. So I share concerns about artificial turf for this project, and I appreciate the staff's recommendation and thorough analysis. Thank you.
Thank you very
I
much,
think this is
Commissioner.
really
All right.
important, right? Because these fields, these artificial turf fields and lawns that are in the non-coastal zone, those plastics, when they break down, end up in the ocean ultimately.
Everywhere across the state. We are trying to eliminate and minimize our reliance on plastics. That's all I gotta say. Thank you.